Welcome to part 2 of my Turn 10 studio tour, and this is the interview portion. And if you haven't checked out part 1, that was my tour portion. And if you're not familiar with Turn 10 and you haven't watched part 1, they are the developers of the Forza Motorsport series. In this portion of the show, I sat down with, actually, I sat these guys down, Dan Greenawalt and Alan Hartman. And if you're not familiar with these guys, Dan is the creative director for Turn 10 and Alan Hartman is the studio lead. And I've had Alan on the show before. I actually have interviewed him one-on-one. Dan we've had on the show before, but we've never actually interviewed him directly. It was more part of a PR tour that took place at E3. So this is the first time we've actually got to sit down with Dan. And I actually sat both of them down. Unfortunately, I only had 2 microphones, so I mic'd them up. So if you're wondering what they're looking at me standing behind the camera. And I asked them a handful of questions, a lot of questions that you guys out there submitted, both in our forums and on Facebook. So I'd like to thank you all out there, and hopefully I can give you guys credit as I go along. And so basically I'm going to tell you what the question was, because my audio is not the greatest. And I'd rather just tell you here what the question was, and then I will play Dan and Alan's answers. So I'd like to thank those guys for taking the time, out to sit down with me and answer these questions, and they answered pretty much every one that you guys asked. So the first question came from the ISRTV.com forums, and it was from Jarvis, and he asked basically how long was the planning process, or how long did it take to develop Forza 5? Between Forza 4 and Forza 5, how long did that process take? Here it is.
So as I mentioned earlier, Chris Tector, the architect, chief software architect on our team, was involved in the, I guess it was the, Chris, advisory committee on Xbox One? See, I'm working off camera now. The advisory committee for Xbox One. Yeah, Chris sits right over there. Say hello, Chris. So Chris actually was involved from when the first conceptual designs of Xbox One were being put together, and was involved when the chip designs were being done, really the components of it. And there were changes made to Xbox One with Forza features specifically in mind, the type of things where if you're driving huge, dense, complex textures to the graphics card, that capability Chris made sure was going to be part of the design, so games like ours would be able to get the results we do. So Chris was involved very early, so by the time the team rolled off of Forza 4, Chris already had the plan of how we were going to move over to the next generation. So what was the architecture of our software? What were the tool chain changes we would have to do, the pipeline changes, and even the plan of how we would migrate from alpha kits to beta kits to final hardware while developing the software. So we actually had a huge head start that the second, literally, probably honestly, weeks before the game hit the shelf, we had engineers already assigned to that work and starting to work on Forza 5.
And also on top of that, we were involved in the actual, I guess you'd say, philosophy behind what Xbox One and what the next generation would be about. So at the same time those hardware advisory committees were going on, there were also experiential ones talking about having instant switching and connected to the cloud. And a lot of those ideas, and that allowed us, so I was in those, Chris was in some of those, other people on the team were on those. So this is long before Forza 5 had a name and before Xbox One had a name. We were talking about light and atmosphere. We were talking about cloud features like Drivatar. Those were coming out of collective brainstorming between the platform team and the franchise teams like ours around what we thought the next generation should be about from a very high level.
Okay, and then another one from Jarvis was, who is Forza geared towards? More the casual gamer or racer, or hardcore sim racers like us?
Rock, paper, scissors?
I'll let you grab this. So there's a design philosophy behind Forza, and we've had it for over 10 years now, that we don't compromise, we don't pick sides there. So what we try and do is build a game that at its core has a simulation engine that's getting better every single time through better partnerships, through better access. We're pushing and pushing and pushing to try and make sure that that simulation is better. I don't believe you have to say this is for one person or another unless you're inadequate in how you're going to design it. We can put layers, we can put assists on top. Now, there's always going to be a multifaceted interface. You know, there's which people have it, there's going to be who has which peripherals, there's a lot of different ways that people access that, and that's going to gate people from getting inside of the experience. But the experience we design is one that's meant to have the full path of mastery. A 5-year-old kid can jump in, they've got lots of assists, they're using a controller, the game almost drives itself. But as they turn more and more and more assists off, you get guys like Joseph Newgarden, and you get these incredible drivers who can come in and have not only a great time in the game and have fun, but they're actually hitting their marks, they're getting hot lap times, they're the fastest people in our community. So I don't think we're really trying to choose who it's made for.
At the same time, as we talked about earlier when we were doing the walk around and looking at how we had built Long Beach, there are elements to how we build a track like Long Beach which are trying to make sure, yes, it's sub-millimeter, sub-centimeter accurate as a track, so that when Joseph comes in, he's able to pick his sight markers and his break points, and they're just there. All those details are in the track. But at the same time, we're trying to capture the atmosphere, the look, the feel of being at that track, something that someone like myself that actually has never gone around Long Beach, but I watched it for years on television, I've seen the in-car shots, it feels right. It gives me that feeling, it gives me that lighting, that sense of place to make Long Beach come alive. So yes, it's playing towards the hardcore, the few handfuls of people that have actually raced on it, but then it's also playing to the millions that have watched it on TV and have always wanted to have that experience.
And then on a follow-up to Alan's talking about how Long Beach was laser scanned, I asked how many other tracks in Forza 5 are laser scanned, and I'd also like to give credit to BKNC from our forums for asking a similar question. So here was their answer to that.
So as we talked about earlier, there's the fantasy tracks that, like Alps. We didn't laser scan Alps because Alps is a combination of locations across Switzerland, northern Italy. It is trying to deliver that essence, that feel, but it was more about this is a fantastical place. If a track like this were built in the top of the Alps, this is what it would look like, this is what it would feel like. Laser scanning wasn't going to do us very much on the accuracy side there. We did go there, we did take tens of thousands of reference photos, video, lighting studies, etc., to get the look of the Alps. But when we came to Prague, and there was a city we wanted to recreate, there was that sense of texture, that sense of place, that history, then we did bring the laser scanning in. We did recreate those moments like on the bridge, around the cathedral with all that detail, having that accurate. Then, as we were talking about, we go in and actually make that track be, since there is no track in Prague, we took liberties, but they were liberties within that accuracy, right? We'd open up that square so you could have a nice sweeper through it. We'd open up the streets so you can have passing and then bring it back in to have a challenging chicane. We could take those liberties and still have that essence of Prague. Through our back catalog of real-world tracks, I think the majority of them got updated with laser scanning. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, we went through a process of grading.
Yeah.
So we looked at our old reference and our old tracks. Some were captured in, as early as 2005. I mean, captured for the original Forza Motorsport. And some of that reference is really outdated. One, because it's inaccurate, but also two, because we've learned so much about, even if we weren't doing laser scanning, how we would capture it with photo reference and even megapixel of the camera, you just get better reference. So we went through and graded all of our reference and graded our tracks, and for us, the next generation was about having that atmosphere, having the texture, and we believe our fans deserve to have the same level of accuracy all the way across. So we chucked a lot of stuff. We straight up threw away.
Silverstone, gone.
Yeah.
Redid it.
Some of those, the reference was so good that we were able to rebuild without laser scanning. Some of them required all new laser scanning, and some were actually up to date. So what they required was updating where we'd go and we'd touch it up, but it wasn't a major overhaul. The majority required a major overhaul. I mean, by far the majority of the tracks.
And then another follow-up for the tracks again, I asked, so now will all tracks in the Forza series be laser scanned?
Laser scan. It not only gives us that accuracy, it gives us a sense of future-proofing in our reference, that level of detail. As platforms evolve, as our engine evolves, we can go back and add more detail and more, pull more out of that reference. We can go and update tracks quickly because actually laser scanning, although it has a lot more accuracy and a lot more detail to it, it saves us time in the production of the track as well. I'm not sure it saves us money, but it saves us time. So it actually shortens that whole kind of roughing in phase of just trying to get everything put in the right place and getting everything lined up. Really shortcuts that process for us.
So BKNC had another great question, and it was, where do they get their technical data, you know, as far as the car manufacturers go? Specifically, he was asking about like the IndyCar and the Lotus. You know, do those teams provide data? And then also I had expanded it a little bit and asked about tire data from Pirelli. And Dan corrected me on that. Pirelli was involved in Forza Motorsport 4. But anyway, here's what he said.
Well, Pirelli was who we worked with on Forza Motorsport 4.
Oh, okay.
But actually on Forza 5 we worked with Calspan. Okay. So rather than working with one manufacturer, we went with the test company because they could be agnostic, and we bought pallets of tires and had them tested. So that allowed us to create a much more accurate cloud of data around tires in general that was more extensible to more situations, more tires and the like. We also were able to use them as an advisory board to update our overall way we do tires to make it really on the cutting edge of accuracy. So there's not a real short answer, honestly, to how we work with manufacturers, be it with Dallara and the like. Some of them are very cutting edge and have a very thin wall between their engineering department, their licensing department, their marketing department and the like, just a much more agile company. And when we're working with companies like that, they'll send us CAD data, they'll send us engineering specs, they'll send us all sorts of information, and we can ask follow-up questions of the engineers. And honestly, those are our favorite types of relationships because they make the entire game, the entire simulation better, not just their cars. Like a double A-arm suspension on this sports car has a lot in common with one on another sports car. So they can make the whole simulation better, but that's not the majority. The majority of them, you know, honestly, we're dealing with a licensed piece of content and maybe with a marketing department. And it's not in their best interest or not even in their expertise to give us the level of accuracy we require. So everything that we get from the manufacturers, we treat with some amount of distrust. That's not a judgment and saying they're bad. It's just we're not dealing with the engineers. So we test things ourselves. We'll call the original equipment manufacturer that made this transmission that was put into that car. We'll find out gear ratios from there. We'll get weights, like the weight of this drive shaft. Sometimes we'll test it based on materials. We know that the material was this. We know it's this long and that wide. We'll go get something manufactured. We'll weigh it ourselves. It all comes down to having a crack research department, which most video game makers don't have to have. A big research department that has a level of distrust more akin to the media. You know, think about an investigative reporter that's saying, yeah, I know you told me that car is 640 horsepower, but I'd really like to get it on a dyno. Right. So thanks for the data, but we're going to test it ourselves a little bit.
So then moving on to sound capture, I asked, do they specifically capture the sound for all the cars in the series? Or do they have, you know, a library that they can pull from? How do they go about that?
Yeah, that used to be our approach of just every car we could possibly get on a dyno, we would. We've evolved that sound library to the point, we filled it out to the point now that, yes, it's still great to get every new car we can onto a dyno, but it's more about the unique components from each car, making sure we're going off and recording those. So we get the right engine configuration in the right car with the right exhaust, with the right drivetrain, with the right turbo. And since we have all those components when a new car comes out and we can't get our hands on it immediately, we can piece that car back together. And then as you saw upstairs, when we do get our hands on those cars and the owners will let us take this liberty, which many have, we'll rip the exhaust off and put a straight pipe on there. So when we upgrade the car, you're actually getting the upgraded sound of that car running a straight pipe instead of a stock muffler. The difference in Forza 5 in audio came to paying more attention to not just the sounds the car makes, but the sounds the car makes during different situations. So what does a car sound like when you're just slamming it into gear and taking off the line and there's that stress, the initial stress on the whole system of that car going? What's it sound like when you're revving that thing out up next to red line and things just sounding like it's about to come apart? Really trying to hit those extreme sounds, the off throttle sound of like, okay, I've fully taken the car off load, what does it sound like with that? And making sure we're getting those events in there as well as the base mechanical sounds.
Okay, so the next question came from a lot of people, and this was based on some DirectX 12 test footage that surfaced from the Game Developers Conference recently. And Uncle from our forums asked this, plus a few other people on Facebook asked this similar question. Will we ever see Forza Motorsport, the Forza Motorsport series, come to the PC?
Never say never.
Never say never.
We recently, as most people would know, we recently showed a demonstration of our engine ported to DX12. And like most efforts, it was the tip of the iceberg. So the amount of work required to do that. So people see Prague, a track in Forza 5, running the P1, and it looks great. It's 60 frames per second, 1080p. And I think people go, wow, it's done, right? I saw that on the forums. Oh, it's done.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is like the tip of the iceberg. No, that's just 10% of the work, getting it in that situation. So it was great that we were able to do that. It's important to us to be able to support Microsoft and other initiatives, but more importantly, we like to have our engine able to be agile. And having, Chris Tector, who Alan mentioned earlier, he came up with a strategy that allowed us to go from 360 to Xbox One. That strategy actually makes our engine more agile. And so it allowed us to more easily do what we did for the DX12 port. But man, that is just very, very small percentage of what would have to get done.
And there's another part to this as well. If whatever platform we might take Forza to in the future, it's not going to be a port.
Yeah.
We're not going to go off and just slam our game and put it on some platform that has, honestly, new capabilities and new expectations and just port what we had over. We're going to go build a Forza for that platform.
Okay, so next question was related to weather. And this came from Crassy in the forums. And he asked, will weather be implemented in Forza 5? And if not Forza 5, how about Forza 6?
There's a short list of features that, look, we're racing fans, we're in the community, we race the games ourselves, we play a lot of other racing games, and we're motorsport fans in general. So there's a list of features that we're always looking at, but what's important to us is we do not do anything until we believe it's going to be at the level of quality we think our fans deserve, and that we hold ourselves accountable to. So, we weren't the first to add cockpits. Cockpits came in Forza Motorsport 3, and what was important to us is they were super immersive, they were super accurate, and it was a fun place to drive in our game. As we look at other features that we call the usual suspects, but I don't mean that in a derogatory way, honestly. It's just because we're always thinking about them. They always come up in the lineup whenever we think about features we should do. We look at when is the right time to do them to make sure we execute them at the way that we believe our fans deserve. So Forza 5 wasn't the right time, but when that time will be, we just have to keep considering them and looking at what we're doing.
Then after the answer that they just gave us here, I asked, so are there going to be any major updates to Forza 5, before we see Forza 6 come out? So like a weather, day to night transition, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the features that we get asked about a lot, we have a place that we hold them, that we look at every time we're doing major development work, be it for a content update or future games, considering what we might do in the future. Some things are, I think it's difficult to know without having worked in development for a long time how difficult some things really are and how much of an overhaul it would require, not just of the system, but of the actual content, be it the track, which cars, the level of detail of the cars and things like that. So I understand why people say, well, that should be easy and that should be hard. It's not always as easy or as hard as it appears. So we have done major overhauls, and that's the thing I think is worth pointing out. We've had updates almost every 2 weeks in Forza Motorsport 5. There have been big overhauls that are fan requested based on our economy, changes that are coming actually in April. There's more changes coming after that, and things like Long Beach, as well as Road America. New aspects to the career. So we are committed to continuing to evolve this game in ways that we just haven't been able to in the past. We could do content updates, patches on the Xbox 360, but it was much more of a process. And now the Xbox One is it is architected to be connected. It's architected to be updated, which allows us to have a conversation with our players. So when we see things, hey, that looks like a reasonable amount of work, they want it, that's great, let's do it. And we can add that into the game every 2 weeks, something new.
Chris Chiapinelli also, sorry if I mispronounced your name there, bud. He'd also asked about, and this is from Facebook, whether or not motion sims could be compatible with Forza. So in other words, is there data being output that could potentially be used for like a sim experience, for Sim Commander? Is that possible?
So this gets into a really, for me, because I'm kind of developer dorky, I like detailed questions, so I'll try not to go too detailed, but the truth is our simulation engine makes things like that really easy. We already have real-time telemetry. We have forces going on the car at all times, and the things that power those hydraulic systems are really just a set of ones and zeros, numbers, that are representing different G-forces on the body, suspension, compression, and the like. So the actual data stream and sending an accurate data stream for us is nothing. I mean, it takes no work. The issue is actually getting that data stream through the correct languages to a peripheral. So it has to get off the box through USB, through an input language, be it XID or some other form of language that you're going to talk to this interface. And that hardware has to have the correct security to work with the Xbox One platform. So what we get into is a situation where we need to have a partner who feels that there is enough of an install base out there, enough people who are interested to take all of that investment on, that they're going to build a piece of hardware that is going to have the security chip and can receive our data. The work for us, honestly, is very, very easy to output the data. The work for, let's call it a hydraulic developer out there that has a PC and they've written an app, and that app has to interface to the Xbox One, they need to get a security chip for their PC. That is a lot to ask for a company that usually is not selling a lot of these things.
Right.
So what we're always looking at, because we hear this from our customers, and the truth is that we do want to have this path of mastery that goes all the way up to like Joseph Newgarden. We're always looking at how could we help out? Because it's not the dev work. The dev work, in a sense, you could say is almost
So if anyone's listening out there.
Okay, so next question. And this question, I got to say, I probably had 100 different people ask me this question when Forza 5 was launched. And I wish I had the answer, but these guys are going to give you the best answer that they could. And one guy in particular, Apex V-Gear, who I actually met in person in Dallas just recently, a guy named Tim, and his question was, why don't Fanatic wheels work on the Xbox One?
Well, I think to start off, before we even answer the question, we totally understand. I mean, peripherals are expensive. And the reason people play racing games is because they're passionate about cars, not because they're damn wealthy, right? So we appreciate that our fans have made big investments in our game and now in a console, right? The Xbox One is not a cheap console, it's new hardware. And wheels are an expensive part of that, and they've been an investment that people have made on the last generation and for PC racing and the like. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers have wives that don't appreciate the space they take up. So the first thing to say is we are like that, right? My wife doesn't like the extra wheels I have, and I don't want to spend extra money on wheels. So that part is completely understood. The question of why, there is volumes to be spoken of why. What I think is in more of our purview of what we have control over is the future and what we're trying to do, what we want to do with the wheels in the future, and who we're trying to talk to get on board. We have the same hunger as our fans. We want to get more companies on board because it's good for us. It's good for our gamers, it's good for the game, it's good for the community. So we just keep pushing to figure out how we can get more on board.
Cool.
If there's one more thing to add there that is just the positive light, I guess, at the end of the tunnel, is the capabilities of the box in terms of peripherals is a generational change over where we were on 360. So we have our own pet peripherals we'd like to see out there as well. We want force feedback pedals.
Yeah.
We can do that now. Someone can, we can't, we're not in the pedal business, but we can do that now on the Xbox One that we couldn't on the 360. So let's go out there and make those.
Yeah, I mean the controller with the rumble and the triggers, we prototyped that. You had asked, when did Xbox One development start? Those triggers were something that we were involved in asking for. And part of it was, once we start working on this maybe someday will lead to pedals. I mean, it's just such an obvious thing that when you're a driver, you know that, pedals in cars have resistance, and they're different. Like the gas pedal is resistant one way, and that you sometimes get feedback from the chassis vibration. And the brake pedal is different because it's a pressure pedal rather than a rumble. So these are things we're really interested in, and being involved in the beginning made the controller much better. So it's funny, we were thinking more long-term and simulation, and meanwhile we made a much more immersive experience for the average gamer out there who gets in and they can now control a car better because of the rumble and the triggers.
Okay, and then the final question from me was, you guys have been on a 2-year development cycle for the most part, at least on the Forza Motorsport series, not including Forza Horizon, but Forza Motorsport 3 came out 2 years later, Forza 4, 2 years later, Forza 5. Are you guys going to continue on that 2-year development cycle?
We've actually been on a 1-year development cycle if you count Forza Horizon in there, because we've shipped every year for the last 3 years. I'm not going to announce future products, but we are committed to this space. We're going to keep pushing the envelope. We're going to keep pushing the innovation. We're going to keep trying to make the best racing games in the industry and make Xbox One the place where every racer feels like they have to go.
Then in closing, I asked them, was there anything else you would like to add? And this is what they had to say.
I just want to thank sim racing community, our fans in general. We're thrilled with the response to Forza 5, that a third of the install base of Xbox One has gone out and bought it and is playing it, and they're passionate and they're giving us feedback, and hopefully we're giving them more of what they want, and we're keeping them happy, because we're trying. We really are trying.
Okay, so that's going to wrap up my interview with Dan Greenawalt and Alan Hartman, two Turn 10 studio heads. I have to say, and I've hung out with Alan quite a bit at E3, and I mentioned John Wendell, if you watched part 1, I've hung out with him a bit, but I've kind of got to know those guys a little bit, but I really got to hang out with these guys quite a bit that day, and this is the first time I really got to hang out with Dan. And they are really some cool, down-to-earth guys, and I really enjoyed just shooting the breeze with them, talking about, developing the cars. They're all car fanatics, by the way. Talking to them about other sims. They wanted to know what's the best thing on the PC right now. We talked about other console racing titles. We talked about them going to track days. They've all gone to this Dirtfish track day where you drive rally cars, and this other track day, or maybe not all of them, but some of them went to Dirtfish. Or actually, Alan was just going to go to Dirtfish. but they were telling me about this open wheel track day. By the way, guys, you guys ever have any press track days? I want to be invited to that. But a lot of cool group of guys, and I said this in my tour, if I could work for one company in this industry, I mean, there's a lot of companies I'd like to work for in this industry, but if I could choose one, these guys, Turn 10 would be at the top of the list. They just seem like a lot of fun to work with, a lot of fun to hang out with, and they all seem like a family. You know, a lot of them have worked together for a long time, and you can tell there's just some great synergy going on there. I'd like to thank them for taking the time out for this interview. It was a lot of fun doing, and I'd like to thank all you guys out there for submitting your questions. And if I didn't ask your question, I apologize. You know, I was a little limited on time, and I wanted to try to get to, not that your questions weren't important, but I wanted to try to get to the ones that, you know, really kind of touched on, you know, a variety of things. And hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you enjoyed the tour too. Check us out at isrtv.com. We've got daily blogs going on. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Also, the daily blogs are transmitted at those two social media outlets as well. I'm Darren Ganji for Inside Sim Racing. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.